Hi everyone. Today we're doing lesson 8-9, fraction multiplication number stories. So I'm going to start off with the math message today. I'm going to read it and I just want you to follow along. Marta's sewing machine needle lasts for about 7.5 hours of sewing time before it needs to be replaced. Marta bought 3 packages of needles. Each package contains 5 needles. If Marta sews for about 3.5 hours each day, will her needles last more than or less than 3 weeks? So what I want you to do right now is pause your screen and go ahead and solve that on your own. And when you think you've got it, I want you to come back so that we can solve it together. Okay, at this point, you should have paused your screen and done the problem on your own, and now you're back so that we could do it together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to understand my problem. So the first thing that I know is that one needle lasts 7.5 hours. I know that she bought 3 packages and each contains 5 needles. And then I know I'm trying to figure out if she sews for 3.5 hours each day, will her needles last more or less than 3 weeks? Okay, so the first thing that I need to figure out is how many needles she has. So I know she bought 3 packages and each contains 5 needles. So to figure out how many needles I have altogether, I'm going to have to do 3 times 5. So I'm going to come here, 3 times 5, and I know that right off the top of my head is 15 needles. So we know she has 15 needles. Okay? So if she has 15 needles and one needle lasts 7.5 hours, how many would 15 needles last? So again, I'm going to multiply. I'm going to take my total 15 needles and I'm going to multiply it by 7.5 because I know one lasts 7.5. So 7.5, 15 times, let's figure it out. So I'm going to put an unknown here because this one is not as easy as 3 times 5. I'm going to put H for hours. Okay, remember when you're multiplying a whole by a mixed number, you need to make sure you multiply the whole times the whole and the whole times the fraction. So first I'm going to do 15 times 7 because that's what I have first. Make sure you're not using a calculator, please. Make sure you're doing all the work how you were taught, whatever multiplication way you like. I'm going to do partition rectangle. But again, whatever you are most comfortable with, as long as it's not a calculator. Okay, and I'm going to put the 7 outside. 7 times 10 is 70. 7 times 5 is 35. And then I'm going to add these two together. Okay, 7 plus 35. 0 plus 5 is 5. 7 plus 3 is 10. So that's the first part of my problem, 105. So 15 times 7 is 105. Am I done there? No. Now I have to do 15 times 1/2. And remember, you take the whole number and you multiply it by the numerator, and you keep the denominator the same. And if I look here, I see that I have an improper fraction. Remember, an improper fraction means that you have more than a whole. So there's a few ways that you can figure this out. We know that 2 over 2 is 1 whole here, so you can keep adding 2 over 2 until you get as close as you can to 15, and then count how many times you did 2 over 2, and that's how many wholes you have. Or what I like to do is I like to just see how many times does 2 go into 15, or how close can I get. So I know the closest I can get isn't to 15, it's right before. I can do 2 times 7 is 14. So I know that I have 7 wholes. That got me to 14. How many is left over? 1, because 14 plus 1 is 15. So 7 holes. That means I did 2 halves plus 2 halves plus 2 halves plus 2 halves 7 times. I'm still not done. I have my 105 here, my 7.5 here. What I can do now is add these together to get this answer. So 105 plus 7.5. Okay, add the wholes. 105 plus 7 equals 112. And then the fraction just stays like this. So I know that my 15 needles will last me 112.5 hours. So I'm going to make a little note of that down here. 15 needles last 112.5 hours. Okay? Should probably, I guess I can't move that around. Okay. So 15 needles last 112.5 hours. Now we know that she sews for 3.5 hours each day, and we want to know if this needles will last her more or less than 3 weeks. So each day. So we have to figure out how many days is she going to be sewing for. So we know 3 weeks, but we don't know how many days. So we're going to come over here. We know there's 7 days in a week times 3 weeks. Again, this one's a quick one, just like that one. 7 times 3. There's going to be 21 days that she's going to be using her needle. So now we can do 21. And she's going to be working for 3.5 hours each of those days. So for 21 days, each day she works for 3.5 hours. So we're going to multiply. And we will do another unknown here because this one's a little bit more steps than just a quick 7 times 3. So 21 times 3 and 21 times 1/2. Remember, you need to make sure you multiply the whole number by the whole number and the mixed number and the fraction in the mixed number. So first we're going to do 21 times 3. Again, please don't use a calculator. Use whatever ways that's best for you. I like to do the rectangle, but you can choose, you can choose what you like to use. Sorry about that. So 21 times 3, 3 times 20, 3 times 2 is 6. Bring the 0. 3 times 1 is 3. Make sure you add these together and you get 63. Remember, you're not done. You only did the wholes. Now you have to do 21 times 1/2. Okay, 21 times the numerator. 21 times 1 is 21 over 2. Okay, again, you can write out 2 over 2. Oh, that's why. 2 over 2 plus 2 is 4, all the way till you get to 21, or as close to 21. But what I like to do is I like to see how many times does 2 go into 21. Okay, I know that I can multiply 2 times 10 to get to 20, and then there's 1 left over. That is a funky looking 10. Sorry about that. So 2 times 10, then there's 1 left over. I'm still not done because this was my answer to this problem, and this was my answer to this problem. Remember, you need to come up here and add them together. All right, 63 plus 10 is 73, and there's no fraction, 73.5. So she's going to be sewing for 73.5 hours for these 3 weeks. Okay, so let's come to my text box. So she's going to be, so for 3 weeks, she's going to be sewing for 73.5 hours. So the question is, if she sews for 3.5 hours each day, will her needles last more or less than 3 weeks? So remember, 15 needles last 112.5 hours. And she's only going to be sewing for 73.5. So her needles are going to last her more than 3 weeks. If you got that, kiss your brain. If you started to understand it as I was doing it, kiss your brain. If you understood any part of this or did any of these steps, kiss your brain, even if you didn't get the right answer, but you did some steps. If you're confused, please go back and pause the video if you have to, go through step by step and understand why you're doing each step to understand it. I know it's a lot of different steps. I keep saying the word step, 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 but that's what number stories are. As you can see here, multi-step. So there's going to be a few steps before you get to your answer. So just make sure you understand why you're doing these things. If you have to pause it and really understand each part, please do that before you move on. Okay, we are going to now go to the next screen. Okay, so this is going to be in your journal. This is something that you guys can have in front of you, or it's on your ConnectEd. But I'm going to read it now. Seamstresses and tailors, people who sew clothes, often buy supplies at a fabric store. Fabric is another word for cloth, a material used to make clothes. Fabric comes wrapped in a bolt. The length of fabric in a bolt varies, but the width is set. The most common widths are 36, 45, 54, 60, 72, and 118 inches. The amount of fabric you buy is measured in yards. When you buy 1 yard of fabric, you are getting a piece of fabric with an area that is 1 yard times the width of the fabric. A pattern like this one for a pair of shorts is traced or pinned onto the fabric before the pieces are cut out and sewn together. So like I said, this is in your journal, and it's also on your ConnectEd screen, so wherever you want to follow along. It says, Ella bought 3 yards of fabric from a bolt that is 45 inches wide. She said, I have 135 square inches of fabric for my project. Do you agree with Ella? Explain why or why not. So here I want you to pause the screen again for me, and I want you to go ahead and solve this. And when you think you figured it out, I want you to come back and solve it with me. Okay, at this point, you should have paused it and solved it, and now you're back to go through it with me. So I'm going to first understand my problem. You should always understand what you are talking about, what the question is asking, and what's going on. So Ella bought 3 yards of fabric. It was 45 inches wide. And she says she has 135 square inches of fabric. Do we agree or disagree? Okay. If you said you agreed, that is because you did 3 times 45. And yes, that answer is 135. However, that is not correct. Ella is incorrect. I do not agree with Ella. And the reason I don't agree with Ella is because you can't multiply units that aren't the same. So 3 yards and 45 inches are not the same. So you have to convert one of them before you can figure it out. So if I want to change, let's change yards to inches. So remember, 1 yard equals 36 inches. Please ignore my messy handwriting. I'm writing with my laptop, and it doesn't always come out the best. So 1 yard is 36 inches. So if I have 3 yards, I'm gonna have 36 inches 3 times. So I'm gonna come down here, 3 times 36. Remember, always make an unknown. I'm gonna put P this time, just because I like that letter. Remember, however you want to solve it, Miss Ferretti is going to put it in a rectangle. 30 and 6. 3. 3 times 3 is 90. 3 times 6 is 18. Come here and add those up. 90 plus 18. 8 plus 0 is 8. 9 plus 1 is 10. So you have 3 yards. I'm going to make another text box. 3 yards equals 108 inches. We know 45 inches wide. So we're going to do 108 times 45 equals C. Okay, now we can multiply because we have inches and inches. So we have 100. We have no 10s, so I'm just not even going to fill in that spot. But remember, usually you would fill in 10 there. And then 45. All right. Excuse my messy box. 4 times 1 is 4. Count the zeros. 1, 2, 3. 5 times 1 is 5. Count the zeros. 1, 2. 40 times 8. 4 times 8 is 32. Count the 0. 1. 8 times 5 is 40. I'm going to come over here. I keep doing this. There's 3 zeros. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, guys. Make sure that you count all the zeros and go through them because, excuse me, when there's a lot of zeros, you might get confused. So 40 times 100, 4 times 1 is 4. There's 3 zeros. So now we're going to add them up. 4,000. Make sure you line your places up. If you don't line your places up, you're going to have the wrong answer because you're going to have numbers all over the place. Zeros. 2 plus 4 is 6. 5 plus 3 is 8. 4 plus nothing is 4. Count 1, 2, 3, comma. 4,860 square inches. So if you were to figure it out in square inches like she did, it would be 4,860 square inches. Now, if you were to figure it out in square yards, you would leave the 3 yards how it is, and we would change the 45 inches. So I want you guys to look at this, look at what I did, because I'm about to clear the screen and start all over. So if I did square inches, I would change the yards to inches, but now I'm clearing the screen. And I am going to now change my yards to, my inches to yards. So I know I have 3 yards. And now I got to change 45 inches. So I know 1 yard is 36 inches. So I have a little bit more than a yard here. Sorry, I don't know why I'm losing my voice all of a sudden. So I'm going to subtract 45 minus 36. And I can't do that. That becomes 15 minus 6 is 9. So I have here 45 inches is equal to 1 yard with 9 out of 36 inches left over. Okay? And then I can make this a lot smaller. I see that I see that 9 goes into both of these. So I'm going to divide by 9. And divide by 9. It's the same thing as making an equivalent fraction. 9 divided by 9 equals 1. And 36 divided by 9 is 4. So here, 45 inches is 1 1/4 of a yard. So now I have 3 yards and 1 1/4. Okay, so all I did here was change my inches to yards. Okay, I know that 36 inches is 1 yard. I found out that I still have 9 left over because 45 is bigger than 36. So I know I have 1 yard and a little bit left over, which is 9. 9 out of 36. I converted it. I found an equivalent fraction that's a lot smaller, 1/4, and now I can multiply them. 3 times 1 and 1/4. 3 times 1, don't forget, you got to do it times both, is 3, and 3/4 square, I'm not writing the whole thing out, sorry, yards. So we found this problem 2 different ways. We found it in square inches and we found it in square yards. So 3 and 3/4 square yards, and I forget the number that we had before, 4,000 something square inches. But Ella is wrong. 135 square inches is wrong because you can't multiply yards times inches. You have to convert one or the other. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and do your journal pages. Keep this in mind. Keep inches and yards in mind. And good luck.